So welcome to today's meeting. Don't have. Okay. No, it might be yours. Right, I think we're okay now. So welcome everyone to today's Accounts Commission meeting, which is in Edinburgh today, and we're trialing in slightly different format. So we're using the laptops as the video facilities. Hopefully it will work well. It has been recorded. This recording will be made available via the Accounts Commission's website as soon as possible, and is available on request in the interim. I ask everyone to turn off their mics on their laptops. Members of the public are also welcome to observe the public session of the Commission's meeting. Those who are watching, thank you for taking the time to join us. You're here to observe and not to participate, and therefore your camera and microphone are already off. But I also want to particularly welcome representatives from East Lothian Council here in the room this morning. So thank you for joining us. For anyone participating in the meeting who's joining us online, please keep your camera off and your microphone mute, except when it's your item to discuss. I also ask those who are speaking during the meeting, whether here in person or online, to speak clearly and loudly for the benefit of the recording and for colleagues or observers who have reduced hearing. So, on that basis, we now start at item 1. Sarah, apologies for absence.
No apologies submitted today.
Thank you. Item 2 is declarations of connections, and we've got a few of them here this morning. So I can ask members of a connection or interest regarding any items on today's agenda, please state the connection of it or interest and whether they consider it material enough to need to recuse themselves from the meeting. Carol, Helena, Jennifer, Angela. Carol.
I've got a declaration on the future of public audit model because I'm a board member of one of the auditing bodies.
Jennifer.
2 items. I live in East Lothian Council area. Don't consider that material enough to recuse myself from the best value discussion. And I'm the chief executive of a public body that's audited by Audit Scotland. And I've checked with the ethics partner who's happy for me to participate in the discussion on FPAM this afternoon.
Okay. Helena.
Thank you. As noted on my register of interests, I am a resident of East Lothian Council. Both the auditors and the ethics partner are aware of my connection, and we're aware in advance of me preparing the controller audit report, and that consent I can.
Okay. Angela.
I've got 2 declarations of interest. One on the best value of East Lothian Council, just to say that I was chief executive there up until 2019. Having checked with the ethics partner, though, there's nothing to say that I can't participate in the discussion. And the item number 15, future public audit. I'm a member of audited bodies, but again, happy to participate in the discussion.
And likewise, I missed that bit. Actually, I can participate in the meeting.
Malcolm.
Yeah, item 15, Chair, just a declaration of connection. Like the others, I'm a member of an audited body, so it's just by way of transparency, and I don't believe it's material enough to.
Okay, so item 3 then takes us to order of business. As normal, I'd like to seek the Commission's approval for the order of business today. I propose that we consider items 9 to 16 in private for the reasons set out on the agenda. Are members agreed? It's at item 4, minutes of the matters arising from a previous meeting. Sarah?
Yes, Chair, there was one outstanding action in relation to establishing what work is being done in relation to council tax reform, and an update on that is provided in the local government policy update today. Just 2 other points. Item 12, the budget briefing, which was published on the 22nd of May. Really good range of media coverage, and thank you to Derek for his work as sponsor and media lead on that. And item 15, the Quality of Public Audit in Scotland report was published yesterday with an amended key message 1 to reflect the Commission discussions at the last meeting. Very happy to take any comments or questions on the minutes.
You have already approved it, you haven't found any correspondence, but again, intent to approve. Thank you. Okay, so that brings us to the first substantive item on today's agenda, which is the best value for East Lothian Council. This is a statutory report by the Controller of Audit on best value in East Lothian Council. The report draws attention to the findings from the Council's 2023-2024 annual audit report and how effectively the Council this demonstrates best value. The Commission is invited to consider and endorse the Controller's report in this session. We will then consider in private later today how we wish to proceed. The Controller and the audit team are here to provide any clarifications or answer to questions that members may have on both the Controller's report and the annual audit report as it relates to best value. And we have in the room Helena, John Boyd and Mark Ferris, the audit team and the Controller of Audit. I'm going to hand over to Helena to outline how she wants us to consider the issues that have been raised in the report.
Thank you, Chair, and I welcome the opportunity to present my best value report on East Lothian Council to the Commission today. And I'm delighted to be joined by John and Mark, who are sat here beside me from the audit team. As my report sets out, the Council are committed to the principles of best value and have made good progress in implementing the improvement actions arising from the Best Value Assurance Report in 2018. The Council has a focus on continuous improvement and recognise that there is still more to be done to support the delivery of services in a financially sustainable way, and that further work is required to address internal control inconsistencies highlighted by the external auditor. Auditors concluded that the Council's leadership had been effective in setting out a clear vision and priorities and took steps to reprioritise in February 2024 to take account of the changing context. The Council has clear outcome targets for priority areas and appropriate arrangements for reporting performance, although auditors have highlighted that it could enhance public performance reporting, and it should look to articulate what its level of tolerances for performance areas that have been deprioritised. Of the Council's top 10 indicators, 5 were reported as maintained or improving, and 2 showing as declining, with data unavailable for 3 indicators at the time of the accounts. Looking at the local government benchmarking framework indicators, there is a broadly positive picture across all themes. 45% have improved since last year and 56% have improved since the base year. Auditors have concluded that the Council has appropriate budget setting and monitoring arrangements in place, but as I've already mentioned, have highlighted internal control inconsistencies which need to be addressed before the Council migrates to a new financial system. As with many councils, East Lothian Council faces significant financial challenges, and I'd like to draw out a couple of key points from my report today. Firstly, the Council has a forecast cumulative budget gap of 45.9 million for the period 2026-27 to 2029-30, but has yet to set out how it will close this gap. Secondly, in 2023-24, the Council struggled to deliver against its savings plans and reported an overspend of 12.3 million, which was met by both IJB and Council reserves. Thirdly, the Council's total usable reserves at 31st March 2024 was 17.1% of its budget, which is below the national average of 23.9%. And this may fall further when their outturn is reported. And finally, the Council's financial strategy recognises that it must minimise the use of one-off resources to balance the budget, but it is clear that effective management of the Council reserves will be a necessary part of maintaining financial sustainability. The Council needs to set out how it will address its future budget gaps and, in its challenging reserves position, how it will keep a close eye on its financial resilience. And I'll pause there. Very happy to take further questions.
Thank you, Helena. As this has become the approach we take on these to help those who are watching and to help us collate our ideas and thoughts, we have a series of themes that we will be asking questions around. Those themes are under finance, transformation, leadership, workforce, community engagement, and depending on where we cover performance itself, performance will be also picked up. We have a lot of questions and everybody's got a chance to ask the questions, but we start off then with finance. If I can ask Derek to lead on.
Thanks so much, Chair, and thanks for the report. I thought it probably first reading it read quite well, and a lot of building blocks there, but I guess when you started to drill down, there was a few queries that I had, and hopefully I can maybe try and tease them out. I mean, obviously a big concern for the Commission with any councils around about financial sustainability. I think probably it's fair to say from reading the report and what aware, East Lothian perhaps faces greater challenges than some, I think particularly with the growth in population. But I wanted, if I could, break questions down into two areas. I'll come on to financial sustainability in a minute, but I wanted to touch on the financial systems and controls, because one of the concerns reading your report and the associated annual audit report, I'm conscious that's about a year out of date now, round about finance, because I suppose one of the things that was coming out to me was a concern about the capacity and the competency of the finance team. And I know they have a very experienced Section 95 officer who's been there for a number of years, but the wider team, there was 4 separate issues within the report that sort of started ringing a few alarm bells for me. One was the bit you highlighted, Helen, about ongoing internal control inconsistencies and inefficiencies. So the use of the word ongoing suggested obviously it's more than 1 year. So it'd be interesting to know, because obviously the council's ability to deal with the future budget challenges will depend critically on the strength of its internal control. So I'd be interested to know a bit more about that. There seemed to be quite a number of adjustments to the 23-24 accounts, apart from the usual suspects that crop up in every council's report about pensions and assets. But so again, sort of linking back to the strength of the team, is there something there that we should be concerned about? I note there's a number of sort of systems that seem to be sort of coming to the end of it, but you mentioned particularly the financial system. I'm conscious later on the agenda we'll be looking at audits that are delayed, and one council in particular has an audit delayed because of the introduction of a new financial system. So if I'm not sure what stage, whether they've started that work or it's still to start with, but that's another link to our previous concerns about the capacity within the team. How assured can we be that the team has the strength to be able to implement a financial system, address internal control issues at the same time? And maybe just finally, I thought some of the responses to the audit report were a bit bullies, maybe not. I can't think of a really good example, but it didn't seem terribly. I wasn't getting the feeling that there was a real purpose to actually address some of the issues within a reasonable timescale. So again, it'd be useful to get an update on that. So hopefully you can resolve some of the concerns I have.
Thank you very much. There's a lot within that, and I'll bring in the audit team to go into some of the more detail, and I think specifically to talk about their observations on the capacity and strength of the finance team as well. Just to pull out a couple of things to begin with, though, I think in terms of the new financial system, that's expected to go live later this year. I think October is the target date for that. And again, the team can talk about how those risks are being managed. I think, as you've highlighted, we know that any major change in financial system does carry risk. But I think in this case as well, there are opportunities in terms of the addressing, using the implementation of that system to address some of the control weaknesses that auditors have highlighted. Just to touch on those, so those were identified in the 22-23 audit and was summarised in a separate management report to the council, followed up by auditors in the 23-24 audit. And again, John and Mark will come on to explain their findings on that in a bit more detail, and the further testing that they did as well to assure themselves as part of the audit to support their audit opinion. And again, John, do you want to say something else about the audit adjustments as well?
Thanks, Helena. I'll just touch initially on the and actually some of the points are clearly linked, but I'll just touch firstly on the inefficiencies and control gaps that we identified as part of our audit procedures. Essentially, there's a number of legacy systems within the council's infrastructure that feed into the council's main finance system. As part of our audit procedures, we're required to have an end-to-end understanding of that process. And in undertaking those procedures, we identified that there were a number of manual interventions required, quite resource intensive, where systems essentially don't directly speak to each other. And it requires manual intervention both to upload as well as to perform reconciliations. And we've identified those across a number of systems. And as a result, there are clearly opportunities there for not only efficiencies, but also an increased risk of control gaps because of the level of manual intervention. In response to that, we have undertaken essentially additional audit procedures. So we undertook greater levels of substantive testing, essentially more increased sampling, if you like, over transactions and balances. Part of that would manifest itself in increased levels of identified audit issues, essentially where you're auditing to a lower threshold and you identify an increased level of adjustments. So I don't think the audit adjustments that were identified were indicative of capacity or capability issues within the finance team themselves. And in actual fact, when I compare East Lothian Council's core finance team against other councils that I audit, I think they are relatively well resourced with skills and experience across the finance team. In terms of the new finance system, obviously any rollout of a new IT project creates significant levels of risk. And as part of our audit work, we have been looking at the arrangements in place at the council to give us assurance over those and how effectively they are managed. The council has established a separate digital transformation board, and they have oversight of the project delivery and will monitor the implementation of that. We also have a separate transformation team, and they are set independently of the core finance team, who will oversee the implementation of that project. Obviously, there'll be interdependencies with finance to feed into that programme, but we're comfortable in terms of the resourcing that they have for oversight and delivery of that transformation. That was really the key, I think, in terms of implementing our audit observations or audit recommendations. We should provide some context around the annual audit. Substantially, our annual audit was actually complete around November, December time. There were obviously issues with the valuation work, which led to further delays in finalising the accounts. And as a result, a number of the recommendations that we had made within our annual audit report and communicated to management, there were actions in flight. And as part of our ongoing audit procedures, we can see those actions being implemented. So, for example, budget monitoring arrangements have been enhanced and refreshed. There's greater grip and control over expenditure in the year as the council looks to tighten its financial management arrangements. And as part of the budget setting process, the council's also looked at its financial strategy and revised that. So actually a number of the recommendations that we've got in our annual audit report we can see have already been implemented, but I appreciate some of the responses, I think, as you said, could be interpreted quite really in terms of how we implement. But as part of our ongoing audit work, we can see the steps that the council's taken to address those.
Okay, thanks, John. I think that's really reassuring, and I think it's interesting you got a comparison with other councils that you audit as well. I think that's quite helpful. I wonder if we could maybe move on then to financial sustainability, because obviously that's a big concern. I think, Helena, in your opening remarks, you probably highlighted some of the concerns that has probably removed some of the questions I was planning to ask, but there's maybe just one particular. You talked about the budget gap of 45.9 million through to 2930. And it does sound as if the council's got the financial building blocks in place to monitor. I suppose I had a very simple and basic question around that. you say that's predicated by 5% council tax increases and flat cash grant settlement. Has the council done some modelling around those scenarios? Because it doesn't come through in the reports. I was looking for some reassurance that there is modelling around that, so we shouldn't get maybe carried away with the fact there's a single budget target. Because the reality is it won't, whatever it will be, it won't be that.
Yeah, so again, the team might want to say a bit more detail about the scenarios that we modelled, if that'd be helpful, but the financial strategy 23 to 28 does consider a range of scenarios, and that identified a funding gap of 41 to 63 million over the 5-year period, inclusive of delivering existing approved savings. So the 45.9 million cumulative budget gap quoted in the report, as you've said, assumes a flat cash settlement and a 5% increase in council tax for the rest of the period. But the financial strategy more generally includes a range of scenarios. John, I don't know if you want to say a bit more about those.
Yes, and the council is obviously one of, I would say, relatively unique as a council in terms of the additional challenges and uncertainties with a growing population and the impact that has in terms of service demand and as a result cost pressures. So actually the scenario planning and budget monitoring are a key aspect for the council around continuously revising and reviewing what their core assumptions are. So while the council sets its financial strategy, it does acknowledge that there's significant uncertainty around that and has to remain agile in response to it.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Mike, did you want to?
That's all very helpful. I suppose on the financial sustainability on the revenue side, just to check where things stand on delivering the savings in the current year, and then two similar issues. One is the IJB, where I see there was a pulling on reserves from the previous years, and reserve levels seem to be quite low there. Could you update us on the IJB's financial position, particularly reserves, and how that's been taken into account in the context of the medium-term financial strategy and the numbers you've been talking about for budget gaps? Then on the capital side, how far has the financial strategy revised the profile of the capital investment program, given the big shift out of 324? And then on a substantive point, a lot of that shift was in relation to schools. What is the impact of that in the real world?
Thank you. I'll bring in John and Mark as well, because there's a lot within this. But in terms of savings in the current year, I'm not sure if we've got the latest position on that, but I'll bring in the team to confirm and perhaps also talk a little bit about the council's history of delivering savings as well. In relation to the IJB, the IJB is forecasting that it will have exhausted its unearmarked reserves by the end of 2025. And we know that the IJB isn't alone in that the other IJBs across the country face similar challenges. And like many, that relationship with the IJB is obviously an area of financial risk for the council, but I believe that there's been a change in leadership at the IJB, change in leadership at the council, and I think there is a commitment there to working together on a refreshed approach. And as part of that, I think the IJB is currently developing its financial strategy. So obviously there is an element of interdependency as to the development of that financial strategy and then how that feeds into the medium term financial strategy as well. So they will need to be, that linkage will need to be made. I don't know if it has at this point, but I'm sure that's something that as a medium term financial strategy continues to be revisited and updated will need to happen. I'll probably pause there actually and bring in John and Mark just on savings and the IJB, and then so we can go on to capital and that.
Yes, as Helena mentioned, we don't have the latest position. The outcome position will be reported as at June. However, I did allude to earlier, the council has implemented a number of cost control measures and budgetary control measures in the year. Really a reinvigoration, if you like, of some of the procedures. This is for budget managers out with the core finance team around essentially a bit of grip and control over the financial costs and delivery. And from monitoring throughout the year, we can see those being implemented, but I couldn't give an exact figure for the outturn position at this stage. What I can assure the committee is the council does have a track record of delivering efficiency savings. So over the last 10 years, it has delivered over £54 million worth of savings, including approximately 29 million in services alone. So essentially initiatives and savings measures that individual service areas have achieved. So really just to reassure commission members that the council does have a track record of implementing those. In relation to the IGB, as Helena mentioned, the uncommitted reserve balance has been utilised in year. That isn't inconsistent with other IGBs that we observe, where the reserve balances are generally committed to either health or local government spend. This was essentially an unearmarked, uncommitted reserve that the IGB had held. The IGB is in the process of revisiting its financial strategy, including a reserve strategy. And as part of that work, there will obviously be engagement with the council throughout, and that's an ongoing activity as part of that process.
Thanks, John. Do you want to say a little bit more about the approach that the council is taking to manage its capital spend as well? And then I think particularly, Mike, you asked about the impact of delays on education, and again, on recognising that a number of the projects that have been reprofiled have been around education, but I'm not sure I have anything specific about the impact of that on service and provision, but would note that outcomes in the education space are in line with national and family group averages, which is obviously a key area. But John, do you want to say something more around the approach to managing capital?
Yeah, so as mentioned in the annual audit report, the council during the course of the year revisited its capital programme. It was an ambitious capital spending programme, but has revisited the delivery of that, both in terms of affordability and from a capital perspective, but also from a revenue implications of that spend. And that's an ongoing process where they continue to monitor those. The last 2 years have been significant areas of capital spend for the council. So the level of spend have been higher than, or planned spend have been higher than in previous years, and therefore that it's not unexpected you would see some carry forward to future years, essentially because of the scale of the planned level of expenditure. In terms of the impact of the plan, the key areas of the programme are in relation to education and schools. And there are a number of the schools mentioned in our report that were deferred, and those have been actively taken forward as part of the capital programme this year and are underway, although I wouldn't have the information about the key stages of completion at this point, but my understanding was the expectation would be they be completed in the current financial year.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think my question's probably largely been answered by Mike's opening one, but what I was, going to ask about was the reliance on reserves to meet budget gaps, and the fact that the level of uncommitted reserves is lower than the Scottish average, and I was struck by a line in the 23-24 AAR report which said significant change will be required over the next 3 years, which is actually quite a short timescale with a focus on statutory services. And I think we probably all know that identifying what's statutory and what's not is sometimes harder than it might first seem. So I just wondered on that particular point, progress the council has made between the, the report, or between the audit being done and between now.
So I think, I suppose just a couple of things to flag in relation to that. So I think in terms of that reliance on reserves, I think it's worth noting that the council has adopted a set of budget development principles as part of its current financial strategy, and a clear principle within that is to, I'm just looking to minimise the use of one-off resources to balance the budget, and ensuring that the use of reserves is limited to investment that will deliver ongoing cost reduction. So I think there is a clear recognition, I think, of the importance to use reserves to invest in the future rather than balancing the budget. I think in terms of that sort of focus on statutory and I think prevention and that prioritisation aspect, I think it's probably a much longer conversation, I think, around how you would prioritise services and how you prioritise preventative spend. But I think the council has been clear about the setting the outcomes that it wants to focus on and how it will be monitoring performance against those. And I think it's worth, as I've mentioned before, reminding ourselves that performance of the council across all of the local government benchmarking framework priority areas is generally positive. I think the area that the audit team have highlighted that where the council could do more is to articulate in the areas that it has deprioritised. What is that acceptable level of tolerance on performance on those areas? And I think perhaps articulating that would go some way to addressing the points that you're raising.
Thank you. Are there any other finance related question that anybody wants to ask before I move on to the next topic? So that takes us into transformation and right.
Very much. Clearly, given the tight financial context, it's going to take more than tight controls to keep financial sustainability. There is a transformation plan, but experience suggests that transformation plan can do many things in different councils. So I'm very interested to get a feeling of how concrete the programme is in terms of where the savings are going to be. How robust that feels, and I think specifically in relation to the link to the reserve, the earmarked reserves of something around 20 million, if I remember, for transformation, and it'd be footnote to check whether completed the transformation thematic work, and if so, anything coming out that.
Yeah, thanks. So bringing the team to talk, because I think the transformation thematic work is very near completion. So I'm sure there'll be some insights that they might want to draw from that. So actually, I'll pass John to see if there's something hot off the press that you want to share.
Yeah, thanks. Our transformation was actually due to be presented to the council's committee in just this month. So we've substantially completed that work. In terms of key messages, the current transformation activity, the council has a transformation programme in place, has a team and governance arrangements in place over that programme of work, and we found that is well resourced and has robust oversight and scrutiny arrangements. We have made a number of recommendations, predominantly about the reporting and oversight of some of the transformation activity, because while there's a core transformation programme, there are other activities which essentially are transformation that don't fit or don't sit currently under the programme of work. And some of these are around budget. We'll address some of the efficiency saving measures. So we've encouraged the council to have a clear focus on the transformation activity, the transformation programme, to consolidate that work. This is consistent reporting. A lot of the current transformation programme is focused on essentially getting some of the core basics within the council, right, and basically building the building blocks for the council. So we touched on earlier around some of the legacy systems and infrastructure, and that is a core area of the transformation activity that's ongoing in the current year. That doesn't directly necessarily deliver efficiency savings in itself, but should then allow the council with the framework then to implement significant service level transformation and allow them to focus the activity on delivering savings. I don't know, Mark, who's leading some of our transformation work, if it's important.
Yeah, and just to say, so the current transformation has got 15 projects for initially. 8 of those are being well progressed. Some of the figures, just in terms of helping to reduce the funding gap going forward, it's estimated that the current portfolio of transformation projects, as they start to crystallise, could generate up to £6 million recurring savings as they start to. So while the council isn't using the transformation programme purely to address the financial sustainability, it is one of the many levers they're using.
Just one supplementary. Can you just touch on the digital and IT, the issues in relation to resourcing and human resourcing and legacy, and how far the transformation program is reliant on getting that in a satisfactory position?
Yeah, so I think as John's already mentioned, the auditors have recommended that the council prioritise its digital strategy to improve service delivery and generate some of those savings and efficiencies over the medium to long term. And I think that's something that the council recognises. John's already mentioned it has a digital, I'm going to get the title wrong, I think, Digital Transformation Board, and that reports and feeds into the Transformation Executive Team who have oversight across the breadth of the transformation. So I think it's an area where the council has recognised the need to make progress, and John might want to come in and offer some more thoughts on the progress that has been made. But I think I'd recognise as well that as we've discussed in previous reports, that digital capability and capacity is an area that East Lothian isn't alone, I think, in facing challenges in implementing and having the capacity and capability to drive forward its digital strategy. I think that's something that the sector more generally has struggled with as well. But John, do you want to say any more about the council's particular?
Yes, so the digital support and resourcing is obviously a key challenge for the council. The council's recognised that it can't stand still, and as Helena mentioned, they're not in terms of that resourcing gap, and has initiatives in place working with Solace and the improvement service around some of that support to help the capacity within the council in implementing some of these or addressing some of the IT challenges it faces.
Interesting. Thanks, Joe. By the way, could you see my hand? Because I can't actually see it, so that's fine. Thank you. I had questions related to the workforce and digital as well. So why is the council not prioritising the use of digital technology transformation, where it could have an impact on workforce? Is it going back to what you said about availability of resource? Is that resource people or money or both?
So I'm not sure I can comment on why they're not prioritising, other than to observe that councils obviously have a number of priorities that management are juggling a number of competing challenges. I think a point as well to the recognition, that they have a digital transformation board and a focus on that. But I think there are challenges sector-wide in relation to digital skills and capacity. So I think, John, unless you've got anything more to add in terms of the resources, I think for me it probably is around those wider challenges.
Yeah, I would add around the investment, as I mentioned, the investment in some of the digital infrastructure essentially should address some of it from a workforce perspective, so some of the inefficiencies that are in place in terms of, particularly around the key finance systems, but the legacy systems. So that should address some of the workforce challenges. And as I mentioned, that then forms almost the building blocks and the basis then for the council to transform further.
So the finance system going live in October is probably an example of them making that investment in digital to tackle some of those.
Can I follow up again around transformation and workforce? So again, with workforce planning, one of the transformation strategies across the piece is shared services. So what's the barrier there? And I mean, they're not alone in this. I mean, we've looked at other councils, but they are, fairly central in terms of location geography. So I would just like to understand better what's the issue in finding shared service opportunities.
Yes, so I think as the thematic work has outlined, the council has looked and explored and continues to look for opportunities in sharing services. And for instance, we know that they share a post of chief internal auditor with Midlothian Council. I think they also share some services around insurance, and the team might want to say a bit more around that. I think as you flagged, some of these barriers are not unique to East Lothian Council, and I think we've discussed them in other areas, and they relate to things around, terms, differences in terms of staffing or contractual arrangements, different IT systems, different local priorities, political differences. So I think, we know and have seen in other areas that those are cited as barriers to shared services. But I think there are examples where East Lothian Council has explored or does have arrangements in place. I don't know, John, Mark, if you've got more examples that you might want to highlight or more to add.
So Helena really touched on the key the key in terms of shared services specifically. There are some, and it's probably worth highlighting, some initiatives that the council has invested in, and it's joint working arrangements. So they currently have a joint working arrangement, a joint venture with Queen Margaret University in relation to an innovation hub, and it's an example with working with partners to deliver positive outcomes for the council. Now that is in its infancy, so we're not in a position to comment around the success of that, but it was really just to highlight the measures the councils are taking, that they're not looking insular, they are looking to work with other partners. And that's just one example.
Eric, did you want to pick up anything?
No, that's fine. That's fine. Cool.
Any other questions on transformation? Okay, takes us then to leadership.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I want to concentrate on political leadership. And again, I noted in the 324 AER report reference to things like in-court meetings, lengthy agendas, the capacity of members to review support documentation. And also there was a line saying that there was evidence of some effective collaborating working between members and officers. And I also noted reference to some members not being engaged. So it's just, if you could maybe just flesh out some of those, I'd be grateful. So if you could tell me a bit more about that, why these comments were there, what caused them, and also maybe on the more positive side, what's been done in terms of member development beyond just the induction and the statutory training, because I do know reference elsewhere in the report to leadership development for officers, which is actually highly positive. I did wonder if that's replicated for members.
Thank you. And I'll bring in the team because I think it's particularly powerful to hear about what they've observed at council meetings, so to hear their perspectives. But just to pull out a couple of things. So I think we've highlighted in the report that there is evidence of collaborative working, and there are examples of that cited, including the budget working group. I think you specifically mentioned the issue that we highlighted, that the audit and governance meeting and the policy and performance review meetings were not quorate and weren't held. I think those appear to be specific to the circumstances at the time, including elections, and we haven't observed those issues since. So just to provide some reassurance on that, I think it is important to highlight. And I think in terms of training and development, I think that is available to all elected members. I think I'd also highlight that officers are responsive to elected members' requests for information, and recognising that meetings might be constrained, but offering those briefings outside where that might be helpful to enhance understanding of an issue. But perhaps, John, if you want to share some of your observations from attending meetings.
Yeah, so from attending the meetings, the council has acknowledged that the meetings in the previous year where they weren't quorate is not examples of good governance at all. But since those they do appear to be exceptional circumstances, it was around an election period, and since that was highlighted, we've not seen any reoccurrence and no concerns around attendance or participation. And actually in presenting the annual report with the opportunity to present that to the full council, and there was good engagement, good discussion with members. I would also highlight, alongside the training that the council have implemented, and I don't think Mark would be able to correct me, but we've not identified any concerns around attendance at training from looking. There's obviously a range of different training activities, but we've not identified any particular concerns around that. The council's also working with the Improvement Service and Solace around training for scrutiny and developing members' scrutiny and the importance of the role of scrutiny from elected members. And as an auditor, we welcome that in terms of the enhancing the role for elected members.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Eleanor, John and Mark, for the suite of reports before us this morning. I wonder if I could just link to leadership, just press a little bit around the strategic council plan. Eleanor, you mentioned in your opening comments that it obviously tracks in terms of its chronology the period of the electoral cycle 22 to 27, but it was refreshed, and I think language in the Covenant report, I think it's 11 to 13 paragraphs, is reprioritised in February 2024. And I'm just really looking for a little bit of reassurance, particularly around the clarity of some of the goals that have been set for the targets, because I think in the Covenant report and in the discussion we've had so far, I'm reassured that the priority areas do have targets that are clear when an area is considered a priority, but when it's considered a non-priority, specifically mentioned, there's a little bit of a lack of clarity about that. And February 24 is over a year and a half ago now. So I'm just seeking any views on whether that's moved on at all, and also just any reassurance around the number of actions and priorities. And there seems to be 68 actions overall, which to me seems quite a high number for the size of council that East Lothian is. So I hope that's clear, and just a bit of reassurance around those two areas would really be welcome.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll bring in John as well. I think the first thing to say, I think, is that the action to reprioritise the council plan in light of the context around the cost of living crisis as it was happening at that point, I think is an example of leadership trying to focus in on a clear set of priorities. I think, as already mentioned, as highlighted in the report, I think what would be helpful is clarity on what an acceptable level of tolerance is for those areas that have been deprioritised. And John might want to say a bit more about how or whether the council is taking that forward. I think in terms of the council action plan, which contains 68 actions, I think that is an attempt to reconcile the variety of different action plans and strategies that we know that organisations have into one accessible place to try and show how they all hang together, noting that the detail may well be in other areas and are monitored and tracked through their own governance processes. But John, I don't know if you've got more to say on the council plan action plan.
Yeah, so just to add to Helena, this is an ongoing activity for the council. I can't put together an update exactly where they are with it. It's something we are following up as part of our external audit this year, but I am aware work is underway with that. We haven't yet seen what that looks like, so it's essentially an ongoing action that the council is focused, but I do know the council are focused on it.
So, I mean, the key point from my perspective is the council are self-aware that they need to work further on this. Yeah, that's good. That's really clear. Thanks very much.
John.
Thank you. Thanks, Helena. Can I just ask again a bit about political leadership? So very much welcome the introduction of the cross-party budget group that is highlighted in the various reports. Could you say a bit more about the activity that's going on in that group and the willingness of that cross-party group to take the difficult decisions on service redesign, service reductions and the like, and income maximisation? Because I know that there's been plans in place for a wee while on some key areas of income maximisation for East Lothian.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think the tough decisions is obviously something that we're going to need to see more and more of, as well as I alluded to in my introduction. And I think, yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see that appetite for that going forward. I think what we can point to, though, and as I've already talked about, is obviously the action of prioritising the corporate plan. I think is an area of working together in that leadership to set out a clear set of priorities. Again, it'll be interesting to see where they've got to on the areas that they've deprioritised and whether they've agreed on an acceptable level of tolerance around that. I think John's already alluded to the savings that have been delivered to date, as well. I might want to talk a bit more around some of the decisions that were taken as part of those, and a bit more about the working group in more detail.
So as an auditor, a key area of focus is obviously around that process of setting and establishing the budget. And I think a key measure of success of the working group is the ability to agree and essentially establish a budget. I think the council would highlight, actually within the budget itself, there are some really challenging decisions, which all councils have faced, particularly around council tax increases and the level of service activity. Helena is right, it's an area where we require focus over the coming years around ongoing difficult decisions that the council makes and will face, and that will be something that we'll have a focus on. But right now, I think the success of that working group is reflected on the focus of the budget and the financial strategy, would be the two measures around the recognition that council can continue in a financially sustainable environment to continue to utilise unearmarked reserves. And that isn't sustainable in the short to medium term.
Just on that, did that really support the budget setting process for this year?
Yeah, I'll leave mine till later. It was well open, but sure. Any other questions under leadership? That takes us to the workforce. Jennifer.
I'm in paras 36 to 38, Helena, in your report. I just want to probe a little bit more around, I guess, progress on following up on some of the workforce planning actions. So I've got three areas to probe, I suppose. Auditors made a number of recommendations around improving the approach to workforce planning, and I noticed quite a number of those actions were due for completion this month, and I just wonder if there's an update on whether we know that they've been followed through and done, and you know, do we does it give us more confidence, I suppose, that the workforce planning approach is being gripped. The second part is then about the translation into the service level workforce planning. I got the sense from your reporting there's a kind of overarching council workforce plan, but then there's not clarity about how at service level they should be using that to develop service level plans. So again, I'm just wondering if there's anything more you can say about that. And then the final thing is about measures of success. I took from your report that the workforce plan has an action plan with a lot of actions, but it's not clear that all of those actions have clear targets. And so how will the council know that it's succeeding? So again, if you could expand on whether you've unearthed anything else that would help with that. I guess overall, I'm just looking to get a sense about whether the council is gripping the feedback on its workforce planning approach, because I think we've alluded to workforce a couple of times already in this conversation, and reforming how the workforce works, who they have, what skills they have is going to be absolutely critical to meeting needs going forward. And if the planning process isn't quite working, it'll be a key area to get on top of.
Yeah, I think, as you've mentioned, a number of the audit recommendations were due for completion this year. I think, unless the team tell me otherwise, that we'll be following up on those in the 24-25 audit. So at the moment, I don't think we have an update on progress in implementing those actions, and that'll be something that we'll be following up in our current audit. I think what I would highlight, though, is that, as you can see from the management response and the detailed thematic work that management have committed to review the workforce plan to ensure that it captures clear performance management information and to develop further smart actions. And they have also committed to develop that service plan guidance to provide that clearer link between the corporate plan and the service level plan. So I think the commitments are there in the management response to the recommendations that auditors have made. And obviously we'll be following up on those in our current audit work.
That's helpful. It sounds like we're going to wait and see kind of how the response to the actions translates into something that we think is going to move the dial on this.
Yeah, I think the commitment is there.
Yeah, thank you. Can I follow up on a couple of other points then, I suppose? Flexible working, obviously a topic that the council, like all other councils, is looking at. There was something in the report about having designed a framework to understand how that was working for employees, but then not implemented the framework or not followed through on it. And again, I'm just wondering again if we got a sense about, is the council getting on top of that sort of stuff? There was a bit of a sense for me about getting good stuff in place and then not kind of taking it to its logical conclusion of really losing it. And this was an example.
Yeah, again, and Mark might want to come in and say a bit more about the framework. But again, I think this is an area that auditors have highlighted that the council should build on that work to review the effectiveness of its work smart policy to ensure that it's capturing the benefits for staff, including the well-being as well as those savings aspects. But I don't know, Mark, if you've got anything further to add.
Just a little bit. I mean, as Helen said, the workforce plan was a lot of the action plans are actually due for completion this month. I think the timing when we actually did the workforce thematic, the team had already done a number of, they were in the kind of tranche 3, so we had built up some areas of good practice. So I think the report was picking up all, so the council does have a workforce plan, clear objectives, action plans that had service level plans as well. We were using the information we have from other councils, areas of good practice. So we were trying to share that good practice. So the council is very receptive to learning from others, looking where they can start to make improvements. So some of the recommendations within the report were to take what the council had already done in terms of the workforce and start to make those improvements by learning from others.
That's really reassuring. Thank you.
Okay, I've got three more if people want to speak. So Ruth, then Andy, then Nicola.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask a bit about workforce capacity and resilience. You've very helpfully explained a bit earlier about the cancelled and delayed meetings and what was happening there, and that looks like it was a bit of a one-off issue. But it did give me some kind of concerns about, was it a capacity question? And then I noticed in the employee feedback that high workload and stress was something that also came up. And it's good to see that the council is obviously keen to tackle that issue, but I just wondered if you had any sense of how much of a problem that was and how under pressure staff were, and is that something that we expect we'll get more feedback on when we get these reports in June that we're expecting?
Thank you. I think the first thing I'd probably like to highlight is the response rate to the staff survey.
Yeah.
Because I've talked before about very low levels of response rates in council staff surveys. And East Lothian Council have a comparatively high response rate of 46% to its staff engagement survey. I think councils recognise, though, that there were certain groups of staff that may not have been fully representative in that, including a high proportion of frontline staff, and so it's considering how to engage those in future surveys. But I think, as you flagged, of those respondents, 50% did report work-related stress and concerns around workload. Again, I'd flag that that's not unusual across the sector. I think this is something that we have seen more generally in other reports. I think the council has set out an approach, a plan to address those. And I think crucially is also intending to revisit the staff survey, which will give an important opportunity to see whether it has actually managed to move the dial on those areas. And I think in terms of that employee wellbeing, there are a number of examples in the Best Value thematic that set in terms of actions that the council is taking to support and improve employee wellbeing. I suppose I also just wanted to pick up, I think, one of the other areas that you might have flagged on that capacity and capability point is within the report. I highlight that the State of the Council report has been delayed due to a movement in a member of staff. I suppose it just to provide some reassurance on that. Reporting on performance is still happening internally. I think what the movement in staff here has presented is an opportunity perhaps to rethink and reconsider the approach, so the delays perhaps more around that rather than just a capacity issue, which I wouldn't want to infer from the two are necessarily linked at this point, because I'm not sure that they are. Yeah, I don't know whether there's anything.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Andy.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks, Helena and guys, for your reports. Very well written as ever. And we're conscious as a commission that we're always commenting and digging around in the hard work of thousands of staff. So I'm glad you're celebrating the fact that there's a 46% survey response rate, because that is pretty good around that. So it's encouraging to hear that from paragraph 41 in your report, Helena. Can I look at succession planning, which is recommendation 6 of the audit team's report? I'm interested in the response, particularly by the council, suggesting that much of the challenge is around a national approach to this. I'm contrasting that because I was privileged to go to East Lothian and the last Best Value report, which I think was in 2018 or 19. It's lost in the mists of my synapses. But around about then. And one of the issues that came out there, I recall, was it was around housing supply locally, housing cost, competition in a free labour market, around poaching of staff, staff's career aspirations, moving on. A relatively small local authority can provide the same career progression generally. And also the real threat around smaller authority, if you lose a few key posts, it's very difficult to replace, and the disproportionate effect of that You then have the gapping strategies that we might have as local authorities to try and save money and tide over time. So could you maybe just give us a flavour or more of a flavour around how confident you are that the risk that's been identified there about future succession planning challenges is being addressed locally, not just nationally? Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yes, it does. And again, I bring the team in. I think with any of this, there are a range of factors at play, I suppose, and you've alluded to the labour market more generally, and some of the wider challenges around housing, etc. And I think within the council and the team will want to come in and talk a bit more about the specific initiatives that the council is doing to ensure that it's an attractive and supportive place to work. I think I'd also point though to the digital transformation, and we've already talked a bit about that already today, and the opportunities that digital can present in terms of reducing inefficiencies, and John already talked about some of the manual interventions that are required and some of the systems that are present. And I think when we think about succession planning, I think we have to think about it in that with all of those different aspects of, what will be the impact of digital transformation on workforce, and what is the impact then on succession planning as well. So I think all of these things are interrelated, but I'll bring in the team to talk about some of the specific actions that the council might be taking as well.
Yes, thanks. So Selena mentioned, and I think you touched on earlier, just some of the current, so the work smart policy and the current arrangements around remote and hybrid working options, and the council implements a number of those. We have highlighted in the report the importance of putting in place clear plans around succession planning, and it was an identified gap as part of our audit work, where we've recommended the council look to clearly articulate that. That's not to say they don't have current processes and measures in place to help address specific gaps or risks, but we think that needs to be clearly articulated, documented. That's only, we'll be following that up as part of our annual audit this year. It only is due to be complete in April, so we've not revisited that. But essentially what you're articulating there is what the audit risk we've highlighted.
Nicola.
Thank you. And thanks very much for the suite of reports. Really comprehensive. My question around workforce, colleagues have picked up on some of my areas of interest. So really there's just one remaining. And it was about, whilst the response rate to the staff survey was particularly encouraging, it was obviously noted, as Helena has mentioned, that the response rate was lowest in those service areas with the highest proportion of frontline staff, particularly in health and social care and in housing. I guess we might surmise that stress levels would be similarly patterned, if not more exacerbated in those areas. But my question really is about the report states that the council intends to put in place a different approach to trying to improve the response rates amongst those frontline services in future. So I just wondered whether there's any more information about the different approach that they might be thinking about. And also, I guess, linked to that, just some clarity around, for interest, who drives forward the workforce planning strategy, and who has the sort of, I guess, the leadership around making sure that the workforce strategy aligns with the overall council plan.
Thanks. I'll bring in Mark and John to talk about the specific governance approach of the workforce plan and the workforce strategy. I'm not sure that we'll have the detail on the additional different approaches that the council will be taking to encourage those staff response rates to improve. I guess just noting that they've recognised that and that they've committed to taking that forward, but I'm not sure we have detail on that. But Mark, John, do you want to say something about the governance of the workforce strategy and the workforce plan?
I suppose the workforce strategy is developed by the executive team, you know, and the leadership team are very involved in developing that, and they've got like a team working remotely to take that forward. I think the points that you've made is that obviously the engagement has varied. And again, it will be something we'll be picking up as part of the 24-25 audit to see the improvements they've made to target those individuals that the response rate's been low in.
And I think I'd also just flag that I understand that the update on progress on the workforce plan and the actions also went to the joint consultative committee. So there is that wider engagement and oversight as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions on workforce? To next. So that moves us then to community engagement.
I wanted to ask a bit more on community engagement, and I noted the consultation that happened on the 2023-24 budget. I just wondered if you had some feedback about the engagement that occurred around that in terms of having these conversations with the public about pressures and challenges that the council are facing, and the fact that, you know, in future years that's going to become more difficult with more difficult conversations around how services are being delivered. Did you get a sense around things that the council might have learned from that process to take forward into future years and potentially much harder conversations that might have to happen?
Yes, so bringing the teams to talk a bit more about, I think it'd be helpful to share some of the reflections from the 24-25 budget consultation. So as you've mentioned, the council consulted on the 23-24 consultation, and I think in response budget, and in response to that got 472 responses, which is about 1.5%, I think, of the population of over 16s. I think they then took a different approach to the consultation for the budget in 2024, which involved a resident survey in April and May, which was sent to a much larger number of residents. But Mark, John, I don't know if you want to come in with a bit more of the detail as to the response rate to that and how those residents were chosen to get a representative sample as well.
Just before Mark comes in, I would highlight that the council recognises, so as part of the budget process, it recognises that the consultation is obviously a key aspect of that, and then Mark will provide some of the information in terms of the uptake. It does acknowledge, however, that for key decisions, it actually finds on key decisions, actually consultation on those, as you would expect, generates a lot more interest. So where there's key aspects, whether or not it relate to imposing parking fees or other council tax increases, the consultation in those matters, they generate clear engagement and recognise the importance of providing a rationale for what the options are and to members. So we have observed that. But if Mark wants to come in with it.
Yeah, I mean, just to add, I think the feedback from the 23-24 and how we do forward in the 24-25 is there to go to the public and ask about, you know, the budget. You know, it's very broad. So the fact that they put different scenarios and ask residents to say, you know, obviously to help support the services you receive, would you be willing for, and instead of using percentages, £3 per week for your council tax, £4 per week, and they use that to engage, and that allowed much more interaction and valuable evidence to help support, which allowed then members to understand the views of the public, so that when it came to the decision-making process and the 10% council tax. So they use that intelligence, I think, in a very clever way to get that engagement and to gauge what was acceptable to residents, and then that played back into the decision-making process.
Good. That sounds very positive, actually. Thank you.
Angela?
Thank you. Just building on that, Eleanor,
And that's great to hear as well, is that work in terms of budget setting. The council has had really good community engagement structures in place for a long period of time, mainly through the community partnerships, community partnerships. Can you say a wee bit about how the council is using those? And they obviously are still investing as far as participatory budgeting is concerned. How are the council using that mechanism to engage on at least awareness of some of the challenges that it faces, if not some feedback on decisions that they might or might not take?
Thanks. So I think you're referencing the council has a number of established community groups. It's got community connected communities, and then it's got 6 local area partnerships, which are supported by connected communities managers, and that those enable that and support that engagement and communication between local communities and the council. And I think there's some detail on that in the thematic. I understand that it's proposed to use those channels and engage them on a regular basis around the priorities and the options that are being considered as part of the budget savings to allow that ongoing dialogue to shape budget decisions. So I think those partnerships and those channels exist to support that engagement. I don't know if we have the detail of how often that engagement happens and how that looks in practice. I think that might be a bit too detailed for us, but certainly I understand that that's the intention for how those partnerships are used.
Thank you.
Nicola?
Yeah, so just one other really on community engagement. I think what comes across is that, as Angela has said, the establishments around community engagement through the local area partnerships are working well. I've struggled to see anything overarching in terms of a strategy for community engagement within the council, and I just wondered if there's any more information on that.
So I believe there is a participation and engagement strategy being drafted at the moment that brings, I think the intention is that it would bring all of that together. I don't know that we have more detail about that.
I don't have an update on where that currently is, but it was under Leeds.
Okay, so it's a kind of watching brief then, really, around an overall approach to community engagement. Okay, thank you.
Now going to turn to performance. Carol, do you want to start off?
Thank you. And it kind of follows on from the conversation you had there, that you could be good community engagement. And I'd like to commend the council for it actually being in the top of the performing lines with a lot of the LGF benchmark indicators, which actually leads me to my question. So it's performing above average in that sense, but all 11 of the satisfaction indicators have declined. So that seems odd to me with a council that's doing really well to then have all the satisfaction ones, considering you've just talked about this good engagement as well. So that's my first question. And my second question is, it's great to see that they've prioritised their top 10 indicators. That's excellent. But these were from 23-24 and there's no data available for 3 of them. So are they really high priority if they don't have data? So that again was at odds to me and kind of follows on from some of the things that we've heard today.
Thank you. So I'll bring in the team to talk about the data availability of the top 10 indicators. I think just on the satisfaction indicators, I haven't got the data in front of me, but I would be pretty confident to say that this is a picture that we see nationally in terms of the decline in satisfaction indicators. And we've obviously talked before about the overall local government benchmarking framework. So I'd need to double check, but I think it is part of a broader picture. But the team, do you want to come in on the indicators, on the actions that don't have indicators at that point?
So it's just in terms of the indicators themselves, I don't have updated figures available for those. What the council articulated as key priority areas Underpinning that will be its service level performance monitoring. So there'll be a number of range of measures underpinning that. What are these are the high level key monitoring arrangements for the council. So although the indicator is not available at the date of publication, the underlying measures to support that and lower level actions are reported at service. So it's really the key areas of focus for the council. But it's just the timing of the availability of the information.
So they are focusing on they are actively focusing on the top 10, even if we don't have the data, because it just seemed strange
Yeah.
that to be a top 10, data.
Any other questions on performance? Any other questions that have been triggered as a consequence of this conversation this morning? Cover off in the public session. Okay, I thank the team here this morning and also for the report. So thank you for that. And we will, as is normally the case, we'll consider our response to the findings later on in the plan. At this point, I'm going to ask the lead to. I'm following my timeline here, so it says here stop after this because it doesn't say stop. Keep going on. So, okay. Are we going on then to? Stop the okay, so please can you turn off the recording, please? Because we're going to update.
Yeah, public session continues. We'll just.
Okay, so we're on item 6 now, the local government policy update. We have Joe in the chair.
Thanks, Jim. Just very quickly, on top of the content of the report, obviously we had the UK government spending review yesterday. It will lead to some more funding for Scotland through the Barnett formula, particularly as a result of the additional spending on health at a UK level. There's some different political viewpoints on how substantial that funding is. There's also been some independent commentary from Spice and Fraser Valander. But I think from a Scottish point of view, the key development will be when the Scottish Government publishes its medium-term financial strategy and also fiscal sustainability delivery plan. They're also due to publish a public service reform strategy as well, and all of that is meant to happen over the course of the rest of this month. I'll provide updates to members on this and any other kind of significant developments over the summer period via the sort of email update roundups that go out, and obviously then capture it all in the policy update report at the next meeting. So not a huge amount to say on that at this point in terms of Scottish local government. That's all I wanted to add. Happy to go straight into questions otherwise.
Derek.
Maybe just as much an observation as I know it's not our role to comment on government policy, but in terms of relationship to the work that we have just published, obviously, there was a few sort of alarm bells ringing for me in this report, and maybe I think one is around the sort of lack of progress or differing views on the fiscal framework from your report, Joe. It did seem to be getting into a territory where COSL and Scottish Government don't seem to be in agreement. I'm not sure you get any further update. I know it's something we keep asking about, but a lack of progress in that worried me as well. Delay in providing guidance on teacher numbers, another area which is kind of critical to councils for their forward planning. The NHS pay award, it's going to think the budget document that we just produced sort of highlight what councils were budgeting for pay for this year, but in terms of public sector pay policy and the NHS proposed deal seems to breach that. So again, that's going to cause financial challenges to councils, I'm sure. And I'm also reminded of the comments of Professor Roy at the last meeting that we had, and we have a programme for government which has identified a number of areas where I don't see any kind of funding implications associated with that. So I suppose just I thought it was worth making the comment that I saw a number of things in here to concern us in terms of financial sustainability and budget piece for the future. Also, it's maybe more for you, Helena, the last for equal pay, the reference is made to 23-24. I was kind of staggered with the scale of what the council are paying in terms of sort of rent and lease back of properties to fund the equal pay settlement. Is that something we should be interested in, or is it just going to come, will it get picked up in the best value audit report of Glasgow in due course? I was kind of staggered, I know it's a largest council, but I was slightly staggered by the arrangements that they've done, whether that represents best value.
Like on that one first, so Derek will be aware I've done two reports on, two Section 102 reports on Glasgow equal pay already in the, and I think whilst the numbers are significant, the arrangements are in line with what was discussed with the Commission. You'll recall I provided an update, I think it was in the December meeting, highlighting the delays the council continues to face in terms of making progress on its equal pay and grading structure. I think those are still persisting. The auditors have highlighted that the council still needs to set out its time scales going forwards. That's a factor that was highlighted in the last annual audit report as well. I think, as I've flagged before, the council still has a bit of time in the agreement that is adopted with the unions before it has to, before it is really running out of time and has to renegotiate. This is an area that I and the auditors continue to pay close attention to. I think everything that we've seen is in line with the updates that I've already provided. I'm sure it will feature in my best value report.
That's fine, thanks.
Jennifer?
I was just interested, Joe, in para 12 in your report, and it possibly is my lack of understanding about the business cases through which councils brought low emission zones in, because I thought the entire point was to stop polluting cars coming into the council area rather than to be a source of income. So I was just interested in whether councils have assumed a level of income from this that they're now not getting because the policy's been too successful, and whether that's something at some point we might want to just lift the lid up on a little bit more.
Absolutely. I thought it was an interesting juxtaposition, if you like, between the revenue raising side of it and the policy intent side of it. And I don't know for sure, but I would imagine that there were forecasts done by each council that has introduced the LIZ of how much it would raise, with an anticipation that realistically it would raise some money because there would be non-compliant vehicles in the zones, at least initially, and that might tail off over time as their use phased out. So it was really just an update on that progress, whereby yes, it's a policy that is achieving its policy intent, but there is a revenue raising implication in the other direction, if you like.
I guess there's just a wider point there that as we go forward and more opportunities for councils to have other revenue raising through things like the visitor levy and stuff, we'd just be interested to know what did they assume and what did they get, and are their forecasts accurate, and how much of a gap does that leave in their finances? I don't know, in real, generally these are small amounts of money, but lots of small amounts of money could add up if the forecasting's wrong in the wrong direction. Thank you.
Mike and then Malcolm.
This bit, paragraph 30, on the funding model for integrated joint boards.
Can I ask, maybe raise your voice a little bit?
I'm sorry.
It's quite low and I think we had a challenge down there, so maybe the mic's not been able to pick it up.
Okay.
We'll raise our voices a little bit more.
The paragraph 35, the funding model for integrated joint boards. It all seems to hinge on the method set out in the agreed integration scheme. Yeah. I would find it very helpful to have a sort of some sort of sense of what the range of methods used are as we go forward in this context. Given that I think we are seeing quite regular issues where there is some degree of tension across the partners on this.
So that was response, obviously, to the query at the last meeting as to how is it set out in the legislation. And the legislation then provides for the integration scheme, which is agreed between the individual council and NHS boards, rather than dictating the model as such in the primary legislation. The integration scheme for each IJB would set out, obviously, which functions are delegated to the IGB and where the responsibility for that sits between the council and the health boards. So each case will be slightly different. We know some IGBs have some services and functions that other IGBs in the country don't. And the integration scheme will set out how, given the individual local circumstances and the logistics, the cost of providing those services is to be determined and calculated. So that's how it was relevant to put into the report, just to clarify that point around the statement the Minister had made about the funding model being set out in legislation, and how it was would be quite a process to go through to amend that, as opposed to something that the government could just make a policy decision to change how the funding works. As we know, of course, we have the lead agency model in the Highland case as well.
Is that something that's going to get picked up in the report?
Pick that up through the IGB overview work, Mike, and see if we can provide some. We might hold some of it already, and if not,
You're getting to that question of how you do when the shortfalls.
Yeah.
Like how the mechanism actually it's there.
And it could be possible, for example, for either myself or the audit team to look at, say, a handful of examples in different types of areas to see how that's set up and what provisions there are, for example, for reviewing the calculation of that as well. Is there a process for for a particular IGB to say we're going to review this every 3 years, 5 years, whatever it might be?
Something we want to look at, but I think in the first place, Alison, your team. Malcolm.
Sorry, Chair, I ought to take my hand down, but I haven't been a sponsor for the reducing car kilometres before. I was going to make exactly the same point as Jenna.
That's fine, thank you. Any other questions for Joe? Again, a very helpful rule book that we use as making stuff down. Okay, thank you. Takes us then to Chair's update. Me. I just want to say this morning, clear signal of, we got a clear sign of what we're doing is making a difference elsewhere. The fact that we were asked, along with the Auditors General, to a meeting with the Cabinet Secretary on the additional scope for learning report. I think signals that they've been read and they are interested in and didn't demur from anything we suggested. So that's a good sign that we're hitting some of the targets. The conversation was an interesting one around the definition of additional needs, as she now realises that actually there's issues around that definition potentially having a skewed effect on the approach to how it's dealt with, and the need for more effective baseline data. Both have been taken on board, and I suspect we'll be asked to have their input to some of that future analysis team will certainly be from those general. So that was an interesting kind of signal that what we're doing is hitting the mark in a good way. We went to the Argyll and Bute workshop meeting, I call it, last month. Again, a council that was very pleased with the report, but have been using it to help them put across their views on monitoring of prioritisation and understanding how best to work out what their budget, balancing their budget issues might look like. So very helpful report as far as they were concerned. We sent it round all the council and council members. And I like the key facts piece, which again helps put in context the challenges they have at more rural level on delivery of uniform delivery of an effective and acceptable service across the job that they run. We've got Lee coming out with some requests for dates for the Commission in 2026. We'll be raising with all this Scotland. I hope we will respond quick because that helps tie down the date as opposed to looking at our diaries and not having dates tied down. And Andrew and I are attending the COSLA leaders session at the end of the month. And although it's the first time we've met the leaders, we've clearly been engaging with COSLA officials and members since I've known Andrew really longer than me. And we've signalled that the work programme we're putting out, the consultation want them to have as much of an input to help us steer our work beyond the elections to help them. So we'll be using that as a way of encouraging them to make a response, a formal response. I think we're meeting them on the day that we're hoping to have launched the report. Is that right, Sarah?
Hopefully that week.
Yeah. So plenty ongoing. If there's any other queries or thoughts, given what I've been doing, that we want to pick up on, please feel free to ask. Okay.
Yeah, it was just a sort of follow-up to the Gowland Butte visit. I thought there was an interesting comment that's made by the council around about community engagement challenges that they've been having, and it's maybe something for us to reflect upon. I'm not sure I'll reflect well on it now, but I think it was this, they were getting frustrated. They were doing a lot of consultation, but were getting frustrated by a few individuals who were following them around the countryside and providing what they would see as obstacles to change it, if that's right. It's to me, it kind of stuck a message that while we're encouraging that engagement, we do need to recognise that engagement comes with its challenges. And I'm not sure how you resolve that, but they were saying that as quite some challenge. There was some people very vocal, which you never really find, but are these people representative of the wider community? And I think that's.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like to miss that point. They are having to deal with local communities, and I suppose if there's a consultation that goes out, the result's not what you want, and you're local, you're going to push to say it wasn't appropriate consultation, and we want to be open and they've got another challenge on their hands to actually try and close that loop. I think there's clearly a desire for a judicial review in the process, so conscious of not wanting to feed any more on that, but there is an issue that I think, as we write in our reports, increasing clarity around how they're consulting on how they're spending the funds or how they're prioritising. Once we ask that, we need to make sure that we've got effective community engagement that is then not challengeable through a judicial review, which is, I think, you have to think about.
So I think that this is something that isn't uncommon. It may be more prevalent in smaller communities, but I don't think it's uncommon. It's quite
prevalent in Edinburgh.
yeah, and I do think it's right that there are certain individuals who then can articulate the argument really, really effectively, and then can engender support through various mechanisms, including social media. COSLA and the government have recently launched a big exercise on civility in public life. And there's quite a few really key partners in that. So I think it's maybe something that we want to keep an eye on in terms of our work, because it could be quite fundamental to what we, our recommendations in terms of best value reports.
Which is our recommendations to keep talking about community engagement, and then if you do engage and you do it well, you end up with a different outcome.
And I think some of the behaviours, particularly towards elected members, because some of the decisions that have been made have been quite shocking, quite frankly. So it is something that we need to be mindful of.
Okay, so if no more questions on that, I assume we are at the end of the session. Yes. Unless there's any other business anybody wants to talk about in public. If I can ask you to turn off the recording now, thank you. Maybe, I think.